Elon Musk pretends to be poor in a CEO conference. Their disrespect costs them everything. In the heart of a bustling city, where skyscrapers pierced the sky and wealth flowed through the streets, stood a man who had built an empire on the backs of the less fortunate. Victor Langley, a notorious landlord, was known for his ruthless business practices and his ability to crush the hopes and dreams of those who dared to stand in his way. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, a lone figure approached Victor's opulent mansion. The man, dressed in tattered clothes and carrying a worn backpack, rang the doorbell with a trembling hand. When the door swung open, revealing Victor's scowling face, the man spoke in a quiet voice. "Please, sir, I need a place to stay. Just for the night." Victor's eyes narrowed as he appraised the stranger. "Do you have money?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. The man shook his head, his gaze fixed on the ground. "No, sir. But I'm willing to work for a roof over my head." A cruel smile tugged at the corners of Victor's mouth. "Work? You're nothing but a vagrant. Get off my property before I call the police." As the door slammed shut, the man stood motionless, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Little did Victor know that the homeless man on his doorstep was none other than Elon Musk, a billionaire who had decided to live among the powerless to understand their struggles firsthand. Elon wandered the streets, his mind reeling from the encounter with Victor. He had known that the wealthy often looked down upon the less fortunate, but experiencing it firsthand was a different matter entirely. As he searched for a place to rest his head, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had a responsibility to do something about the injustice he had witnessed. As the night wore on, Elon found himself in a rundown neighborhood, where the buildings sagged with age and neglect. He spotted a woman sitting on the steps of a crumbling apartment complex, her head buried in her hands. Elon approached her cautiously, unsure of how she would react to his presence. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly. "Are you all right?" The woman looked up, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "No," she whispered. "I'm not all right. My landlord, Victor Langley, just evicted me and my daughter. We have nowhere to go." Elon felt a surge of anger at the mention of Victor's name. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, sitting down beside her. "My name is Elon. I'm in a similar situation myself." The woman managed a weak smile. "I'm Sarah," she said. "It's nice to meet you, Elon, even under these circumstances." As they talked, Elon learned that Sarah was a single mother who had lost her job due to the pandemic. Despite her best efforts, she had fallen behind on rent, and Victor had wasted no time in throwing her out on the streets. Elon's heart ached for her and her daughter, and he vowed to do whatever he could to help them. As dawn broke over the city, Elon and Sarah set out in search of a place to stay. They wandered the streets for hours, knocking on doors and pleading with landlords, but no one was willing to take them in. Exhausted and desperate, they found themselves in a park, where they collapsed onto a bench. It was there that they met Jack, an elderly war veteran who had been living on the streets for years. Jack was a gruff man with a heart of gold, and he took an instant liking to Elon and Sarah. He offered to share his meager supplies with them and told them stories of his time in the military. As they sat together, Jack revealed that he too had been a victim of Victor's cruelty. "That man is a monster," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "He kicked me out of my apartment when I couldn't pay the rent. Said I was a burden on society." Elon's fists clenched at his sides. "We have to do something," he said. "We can't let Victor get away with this." Jack nodded in agreement. "You're right, son. But what can we do? We're just a bunch of homeless folks. No one cares about us." Elon's eyes sparkled with determination. "That's where you're wrong, Jack. We may not have money or power, but we have something more valuable, our humanity. And that's something Victor can never take away from us." Over the next few days, Elon, Sarah, and Jack worked tirelessly to build a community among the homeless. They reached out to others who had been displaced by Victor's greed, offering them food, shelter, and most importantly, a sense of belonging. As word spread of their efforts, more and more people began to join their ranks. One of the most inspiring members of their group was a young artist named Lila. Despite living on the streets, Lila had never lost her passion for creating beauty in the world. She would spend hours sketching on scraps of paper, capturing the faces of those who had been forgotten by society. Elon was in awe of Lila's talent and her resilience. "Your art is incredible," he told her one day as he watched her sketch a portrait of Jack. "It gives people hope, even in the darkest of times." Lila smiled at him, her eyes shining with pride. "That's what art is all about," she said. "It's a way to express our humanity, to show the world that we are more than our circumstances." As the community grew stronger, they began to plan their next move. They knew that they couldn't let Victor continue to exploit the vulnerable, but they also knew that they needed to be smart about how they approached the situation. They decided to start by gathering evidence of Victor's misdeeds, documenting every eviction, every act of cruelty, and every violation of tenants' rights. It was a daunting task, but Elon knew that it was the only way to bring about real change. And with the support of his newfound family, he was ready to take on the challenge. Victor Langley sat in his office, staring out at the city skyline with a smug grin on his face. He had just closed another deal, adding another property to his ever-growing empire. He leaned back in his chair, savoring the feeling of power that coursed through his veins. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he barked, annoyed at the intrusion. His assistant, a timid young woman named Lily, entered the room, her eyes downcast. "Sir, there's a problem," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "A group of tenants is refusing to leave one of your properties. They say they have nowhere else to go." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Well, we'll just have to show them who's in charge around here, won't we?" He stood up, grabbing his coat from the back of his chair. "Get the police on the phone," he ordered. "I want those tenants out of there by the end of the day." Lily nodded, scurrying out of the room to do his bidding. Victor smiled to himself, relishing the thought of crushing yet another group of helpless individuals beneath his heel. Meanwhile, Elon and his community were hard at work, gathering evidence of Victor's misdeeds. They had managed to collect dozens of testimonies from tenants who had been wrongfully evicted, as well as photographic evidence of the squalid conditions in many of Victor's properties. As they worked, they began to hear rumors of a group of tenants who were standing up to Victor, refusing to leave their homes despite his threats. Elon knew that he had to act fast if he wanted to help them. He gathered his friends together, explaining the situation. "We have to do something," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "Those tenants are putting themselves at risk by standing up to Victor. We need to support them in any way we can." Sarah nodded in agreement. "We can't let Victor get away with this," she said. "We have to show him that we won't be intimidated by his bullying tactics." Jack grinned, cracking his knuckles. "I've been waiting for an opportunity to give that bastard a taste of his own medicine," he said. Lila smiled, holding up her sketchbook. "And I'll be there to document every moment of it," she said. With a plan in place, Elon and his friends set out to confront Victor and stand up for the tenants who were fighting for their homes. As they approached the property where the tenants were holding their ground, Elon and his friends were met with a sea of flashing lights and police sirens. Victor had made good on his threat to call in law enforcement, and now a standoff was underway. Elon pushed his way through the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that he had to act fast if he wanted to prevent a tragedy from unfolding. As he reached the front of the crowd, he saw Victor standing on the steps of the building, flanked by a group of police officers. The tenants were huddled together behind a makeshift barricade, their faces etched with fear and determination. Elon stepped forward, his voice ringing out over the chaos. "Victor Langley," he shouted. "We know what you've been doing. We have evidence of your crimes against these tenants and countless others. It's time for you to face justice." Victor's face twisted into a sneer. "And who are you?" he spat. "Just another homeless bum trying to cause trouble?" Elon smiled, pulling off his hat and revealing his true identity. "My name is Elon Musk," he said calmly, "and I'm here to put an end to your reign of terror." The crowd gasped in shock, and even Victor seemed taken aback by the revelation. For a moment, there was silence as everyone processed the news. Then, one of the tenants stepped forward, his voice shaking with emotion. "Mr. Musk," he said, "we can't thank you enough for what you've done. You've given us hope when we thought all was lost." Elon shook his head. It's not me you should be thanking, he said. It's the community that has formed around us. The people who have come together to support each other in the face of adversity. They are the true heroes of this story. As he spoke, Sarah, Jack, and Lila stepped forward, their faces beaming with pride. They had been through so much together, and now they were standing up for what was right. Victor, however, was not ready to concede defeat. You think you can intimidate me with your fancy name and your little band of misfits? He sneered. I'll crush you like I've crushed everyone else who has stood in my way. But Elon and his friends were not afraid. They had the truth on their side, and they were ready to fight for it. In the days that followed, Elon and his community worked tirelessly to build their case against Victor. They reached out to journalists and activists, sharing their stories and the evidence they had gathered. Slowly but surely, public opinion began to turn against the ruthless landlord. Victor, for his part, was not taking the situation lying down. He hired a team of high-powered lawyers to defend him, and he used every trick in the book to try to discredit Elon and his friends. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the truth of his actions. As the story gained traction in the media, more and more people began to come forward with their own tales of abuse at Victor's hands. Former tenants, employees, and even business partners spoke out about his cruel and unethical behavior. Elon and his community were heartened by the outpouring of support, but they knew that they still had a long way to go. They continued to organize protests and rallies, drawing attention to the plight of the homeless and the need for affordable housing. One day, as they were planning their next move, they received a surprise visitor. It was Lily, Victor's assistant, looking nervous and uncertain. I want to help, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I've seen firsthand what Victor has been doing, and I can't stand by and watch it happen anymore. Elon and his friends were skeptical at first, but as Lily began to share what she knew, they realized that she could be a valuable ally. She had access to insider information that could help them build their case against Victor, and she was willing to take the risk of speaking out. With Lily's help, they began to uncover even more damning evidence of Victor's misdeeds. They discovered that he had been bribing city officials to look the other way when he violated building codes and tenant rights, and that he had been using shell companies to hide his assets and evade taxes. As the evidence mounted, Victor began to feel the walls closing in around him. He lashed out at anyone who dared to challenge him, but his anger only served to further alienate him from the public. Elon and his community knew that they were on the brink of a major victory, but they also knew that they couldn't let their guard down. They had to keep fighting until justice was served, no matter the cost. As the legal battle against Victor intensified, Elon and his community faced new challenges. Victor's lawyers were ruthless, using every legal trick in the book to try to discredit their evidence and intimidate their witnesses. But Elon and his friends refused to back down. They knew that they had the truth on their side, and they were determined to see justice done. One day, as they were preparing for a crucial court hearing, Jack pulled Elon aside. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice grave. Elon could tell that something was wrong. What is it, Jack? He asked. Jack took a deep breath. I've been keeping something from you, he said. Something about my past? Elon listened intently as Jack began to share his story. It turned out that Jack had once been a successful businessman himself, with a thriving company and a luxurious lifestyle. But he had let his success go to his head, and he had started to treat his employees and tenants with the same callousness and cruelty that Victor did. I was just like him, Jack said, his voice heavy with regret. I thought I was untouchable, that I could do whatever I wanted. But then I lost everything. My company, my money, my reputation. And I realized that I had been living a lie. Elon was stunned by Jack's confession, but he could see the pain and remorse in the older man's eyes. He reached out and placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. That's not who you are anymore, Jack, he said. You've changed. You've learned from your mistakes, and you've dedicated yourself to helping others. That takes courage and strength. Jack nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. I know, he said, but I still feel like I have to make amends for what I did. That's why I want to testify against Victor. I want to show the world that people can change, that there's always hope for redemption. Elon smiled, feeling a surge of pride and affection for his friend. Then let's do it, he said. Let's show Victor and everyone else what true strength and courage look like. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Elon and his community were ready. They had gathered all of their evidence and witnesses, and they were confident that they had a strong case against Victor. As they entered the courtroom, they were met with a sea of reporters and cameras. The story had captured the attention of the entire city, and everyone was eager to see how it would play out. Victor was already seated at the defendant's table, looking smug and self-assured. But as the hearing began, his confidence began to falter. One by one, Elon and his friends took the stand, sharing their stories and presenting their evidence. Sarah spoke about the hardships she and her daughter had faced after being evicted by Victor, and how Elon and the community had helped them get back on their feet. Lila showed her sketches and paintings of the homeless community, capturing the humanity and resilience of those who had been cast aside by society. But it was Jack's testimony that proved to be the most powerful. As he took the stand, he looked Victor directly in the eye and began to speak. "I know what it's like to be in your shoes, Mr. Langley," he said. "I know the temptation to put profit above people, to treat others as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. But I also know the price that comes with that kind of greed and callousness." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I lost everything because of my own selfishness and cruelty. But I was lucky enough to find a community that showed me a different way. A way of compassion, of kindness, of putting others before myself. And that's the way I choose to live now." As Jack spoke, Elon could see the impact his words were having on the courtroom. The judge was leaning forward in her seat, hanging on every word, and even some of Victor's own lawyers seemed moved by his testimony. After what felt like an eternity, the judge returned to the courtroom to deliver her verdict. Elon and his community held their breath, their hearts pounding in their chests. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, the judge began, "I find the defendant, Victor Langley, guilty of multiple counts of fraud, negligence, and violations of tenant rights." The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Elon felt tears of joy and relief streaming down his face as he hugged his friends tightly. They had done it. They had stood up to Victor and won. But the judge wasn't finished. In addition to the criminal charges, she continued, "I am ordering Mr. Langley to pay restitution to all of the tenants he has wronged, and to donate a significant portion of his wealth to organizations that support the homeless and those in need of affordable housing." Victor's face turned a sickly shade of white as the reality of his defeat sank in. He had always believed that his money and power made him invincible, but now he was facing the consequences of his actions. As he was led away in handcuffs, Elon and his community celebrated their victory. They knew that there was still much work to be done, but they had taken an important first step in the fight for justice and equality. In the weeks and months that followed, Elon and his community worked tirelessly to build a better world for those who had been left behind. With the money from Victor's restitution and donations, they were able to create new affordable housing developments and support programs for the homeless. Sarah was able to move into a new apartment with her daughter, and she started a job training program to help other single mothers get back on their feet. Jack became a mentor to young people who were at risk of falling into the same traps he had, teaching them the value of compassion and community. Lila continued to use her art to inspire and uplift others, creating murals and installations that celebrated the beauty and resilience of the human spirit. And Elon used his platform and resources to advocate for systemic change, working with lawmakers and activists to create policies that would protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. But even as they celebrated their successes, they knew that their work was far from over. There were still countless others who were suffering, who needed their help and support. One day, as they were volunteering at a local soup kitchen, Elon pulled his friends aside. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We've accomplished so much together, but there's still so much more we can do. What if we started our own organization, dedicated to fighting for the rights and dignity of all people?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea," she said. "We could call it Hope for All, and our mission would be to create a world where everyone has a safe and affordable place to call home." Jack nodded in agreement. "And we could partner with other organizations and activists, building a movement that spans the entire country, maybe even the world." Lila grinned, already envisioning the possibilities. I could create a logo and branding materials, something that captures the spirit of what we're trying to achieve. Elon smiled, feeling a sense of purpose and excitement that he had never known before. Then let's do it, he said. Let's build a better world, one act of kindness at a time. As Hope for All began to take shape, Elon and his team faced new challenges and obstacles. They had to navigate the complex world of nonprofit management, fundraising, and public relations, all while staying true to their mission and values. But they refused to let anything stand in their way. They poured their hearts and souls into their work, driven by a deep sense of purpose and a belief in the power of compassion and community. They started small, focusing on local initiatives and grassroots organizing. They worked with schools and community centers to create after-school programs and mentorship opportunities for at-risk youth. They partnered with local businesses and faith groups to provide job training and support services for the homeless and unemployed. And slowly but surely, their efforts began to pay off. More and more people started to take notice of their work, and donations and volunteers began to pour in from all over the country. One day, as Elon was working late in the office, he received a phone call from a reporter at a major news network. "Mr. Musk," the reporter said, "we've been following your organization's work, and we'd like to do a feature story on Hope for All. Would you be willing to sit down for an interview?" Elon was thrilled by the opportunity, but he knew that he couldn't take all the credit for their success. "I'd be happy to talk to you," he said, "but I want to make sure that you include the stories of all the incredible people who have made this work possible. The single mothers, the veterans, the artists, and activists who have poured their hearts into this cause." The reporter agreed, and the feature story aired a few weeks later. It was a powerful testament to the impact that Hope for All was having, and it inspired even more people to get involved and support their work. But Elon and his team knew that they couldn't rest on their laurels. There was still so much work to be done, so many people who needed their help and support. As Hope for All continued to grow and expand, Elon and his team began to dream even bigger. They started to think about ways they could tackle the root causes of poverty and inequality, not just the symptoms. They began to advocate for policy changes at the local, state, and national level, working with lawmakers and activists to create new programs and initiatives that would provide a safety net for the most vulnerable members of society. They also started to think about ways they could use technology and innovation to create new solutions to old problems. Elon reached out to his contacts in the tech industry, challenging them to use their skills and resources to develop new tools and platforms that could help people access affordable housing, healthcare, and education. And as they worked, they began to see the ripple effects of their efforts. Communities that had once been plagued by poverty and despair began to transform, with new businesses and opportunities springing up in their wake. But even as they celebrated their successes, Elon and his team never lost sight of the individual lives they were touching. They continued to work directly with the people they served, listening to their stories and their needs, and adapting their programs and services to meet those needs. One day, as they were hosting a community event in one of the neighborhoods they had helped to revitalize, Elon was approached by an elderly woman with tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Before Hope for All came along, I had lost all hope. I was living on the streets with no one to turn to for help. But your organization gave me a second chance at life. You gave me a home, a community, and a sense of purpose. I will never forget what you've done for me." Elon was deeply moved by her words, and he knew that they encapsulated the true meaning and purpose of their work. It wasn't about the accolades or the recognition, it was about the lives they were changing, one person at a time. As the years passed, Hope for All became a beacon of light and hope for communities across the country. Their work had inspired a new generation of activists and changemakers who were carrying on the fight for justice and equality in their own communities. Elon and his original team had passed the torch to a new generation of leaders, but they remained deeply involved in the work, serving as mentors and advisors to the young people who were carrying on their legacy. And as they looked back on all they had accomplished, they knew that they had truly made a difference in the world. They had shown that compassion and kindness could be a powerful force for change, that ordinary people could come together to create extraordinary things. But they also knew that their work was never truly finished. There would always be new challenges to face, new problems to solve, new people in need of help and support. And so they continued on, driven by the same sense of purpose and commitment that had brought them together all those years ago. They knew that they were part of something much bigger than themselves, a movement that would continue to grow and evolve long after they were gone. And as they looked to the future, they knew that they had laid the foundation for a better world, one built on the principles of compassion, justice, and hope. A world where everyone had a chance to thrive, to live with dignity and purpose, to be part of a community that lifted them up and supported them. It was a world that they had fought for, a world that they had helped to create. And it was a world that they knew would endure long after they were gone, as a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the greatest of challenges. As Elon stood on the stage at a Hope for All gala, looking out at the sea of faces before him, he felt a sense of deep gratitude and pride. "My friends," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "we have come so far together, and we have achieved so much. But our work is not yet done. There are still so many people who need our help, so many communities that are struggling and in pain. But I know that together, we can continue to make a difference. We can continue to build a world where every person has the opportunity to live with dignity, to be part of a community that supports and uplifts them. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Because in the end, that is what life is all about. It's about the connections we make, the lives we touch, the love and compassion we show to one another. That is the true measure of our success, and that is the legacy we will leave behind." As the crowd rose to their feet in applause, Elon knew that he had found his true calling. He had found a way to use his wealth and his influence to make a real difference in the world, to touch the lives of countless people and to inspire others to do the same. And he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would never stop fighting for that better world, that world of hope and possibility and love. Because in the end, that was what truly mattered, and that was what made life worth living.